this video, we will analyze a forehand tennis swing, looking at the joints, bones, and muscles of the shoulder, elbow, and radiocarpal joint of the wrist. The action has been segmented into 4 portions: beginning stance, backward swing, forward swing, and follow-through. Within each segment, joint motions and muscular activities are described. Our subject is a right-handed player, so focus is on the right upper extremity. Starting with the beginning stance, the player chooses a position best to react to the oncoming ball. The racket is held in both hands, pointed forward. We see at the shoulder joint slight medial rotation, abduction, and flexion. At the elbow joint, there is flexion and pronation, and there is extension and ulnar deviation at the wrist joint. The subject begins movement by swinging the racket laterally and posteriorly, which allows a larger range of motion and an increase of momentum available for the forward swing. During the forward swing, the subject swings the racket anteriorly to make contact with the ball. When contact has been made, the subject continues swinging anteriorly and medially across the body and over the left shoulder. Looking at the backswing phase, the player moves out of the beginning stance. The shoulder goes through extension into slight hyperextension, lateral rotation, and abduction. The elbow moves into extension with slight forearm supination. Finally, the wrist goes into extension and radial deviation. Focusing on the shoulder, hyperextension is created by the concentric contraction of prime movers latissimus dorsi and the posterior deltoid. The teres major assists as a concentric synergist. Eccentrically, the anterior deltoid and pectoralis major help decelerate the motion at the shoulder at the end portion of the backswing. The lateral rotation is produced by the concentric contraction of the prime movers posterior deltoid, infraspinatus, and teres minor. At the end portion of the backswing, the anterior deltoid, pectoralis major, subscapularis are eccentrically contracting. Horizontal abduction is created by the concentric contraction of the prime movers posterior deltoid, infraspinatus, and teres minor. Antagonists at the end portion of this motion are the anterior deltoid, pectoralis major, both eccentrically contracting. Looking at the elbow complex, extension at the elbow joint is created by the concentric contraction of the triceps. Eccentrically, the brachialis, brachioradialis, and biceps slow the movement at the end portion of extension. Supination is accomplished at the radio-ulnar joint by the concentric contraction of the biceps and supinator muscles. The pronator teres and pronator quadratus both eccentrically contract at the end portion of this motion. Now focusing on the wrist. Extension is accomplished by the concentric contractions of the extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, and extensor carpi ulnaris. The flexor carpi ulnaris and flexor carpi radialis eccentrically contract at the end portion of this movement. Concentric contraction of the prime mover flexor carpi radialis muscle produces radial deviation. The extensor carpi ulnaris is a concentrically contracted synergist to the radial deviation motion. The antagonistic involvement is by the flexor carpi ulnaris and extensor carpi ulnaris. To begin the forward swing, the subject's shoulder begins to slightly medially rotate, flex, and adduct toward the body. The elbow complex undergoes slight flexion and supination, and the wrist joint moves into ulnar deviation and slight flexion. At the shoulder, the prime movers concentrically contracting for medial rotation are the latissimus dorsi, teres major, subscapularis, pectoralis major, and the anterior deltoid muscles. The anterior deltoid muscle is also active in medial rotation and flexion of the shoulder joint. Note that the clavicular portion of the pectoralis major muscle is also a prime mover in shoulder flexion from 0 to 60 degrees. Adduction occurs with the concentric contractions of the pectoralis major, latissimus dorsi, and teres major muscles. Forward motion at the elbow begins with flexion of the prime movers biceps brachii, brachialis, and brachioradialis muscles, all concentrically contracting. The pronator teres muscle acts as a concentric synergist during flexion as well. The radial ulnar joint at the elbow complex begins to supinate by the concentric contractions of the biceps brachii and supinator muscles. At the wrist joint, the prime movers for ulnar deviation are the flexor carpi ulnaris and the extensor carpi ulnaris muscles. Flexion at the radiocarpal joint brings the wrist from extension into a neutral position. This happens with the concentric contraction of prime movers flexi carpi ulnaris and flexor carpi radialis. Once contact with the ball has been established, the subject begins their follow-through phase. At the shoulder joint, we see several motions occurring: medial rotation, adduction, flexion, and toward the end of the follow-through, horizontal adduction is seen. At the elbow complex, there is flexion and pronation. And finally, the wrist ends the swing with slight radial deviation. Medial rotation at the shoulder is controlled by the posterior deltoid, teres minor, and infraspinatus muscles eccentrically contracting and decelerating the motion at the end phase. Adduction of the shoulder during the follow-through motion is accomplished by the deltoids and supraspinatus muscles in eccentric contractions. Flexion of the shoulder is completed by the eccentric contraction of the posterior deltoid, latissimus dorsi, and teres major muscles. Horizontal adduction of the shoulder is controlled by the posterior deltoid, teres minor, and infraspinatus muscles in eccentric contractions. During follow-through phase at the elbow complex, the elbow flexes with the triceps muscles eccentrically contracting. Pronation at the radioulnar joint is controlled by eccentrically contracting the biceps brachii and supinator muscles. Finally, the follow-through phase is completed by eccentrically contracting the flexor carpi ulnaris and extensor carpi ulnaris to control the radial deviation at the wrist joint. There are several joint and muscle actions that take place to perform a forehand tennis swing. Without all the muscles properly working together, the joints would not be able to complete the full range of motion needed to perform the action.